That. Well, I want to welcome you all tonight, and we're going to get started on our webinar. My name is Tim Cole, and I'm the director of Waypoint Church Partners. And tonight we've got a treat because we basically got all of our traveling ministry staff on the webinar. It's the first time we've done this. Our topic for our webinar tonight is 11 common elder errors. And we've been doing this webinar series for 6 years now. And I was talking with one of our church planters this afternoon and talking about articulating your vision statement, your mission statement, vision statement for his new church. And I got to use the vision statement that we crafted during COVID, that we envision an ever increasing number of thriving churches and leaders in our region. That's kind of what we hope to see at Waypoint if we do our job well. And this webinar tonight gets exactly at that. There's no better way to see a church thrive than for the elders to be thriving. And so if the elders, the leaders of the church are thriving, the church is going to thrive, and vice versa. A church can kind of float along with leaders that are not doing well for a little while, but eventually any kind of crack or fissure in the leadership structure is going to show in the health of the church. And so many of the webinars that we've done over the last 6 years are directed specifically at equipping elders to do their job really well. And so we're glad that you're joining us here tonight. I was trying to do the math. I don't know the exact number, but among the four of us, we've got what will be approaching 150 years of ministry experience, which there's a lot of gray hair here on the screen, and approaching 100 years of senior ministry experience. And so all that being said, I would hate to try and calculate how many elders meetings the four of us have been to in our lifetimes. It's one too many, at least, is what I would say. But we know the value of having elders that are really well equipped, well aligned towards the vision of what God has called their church to do. And so we're going to dive into that. If you haven't already seen it, all of our webinars from the last 6 years are on our YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search for Waypoint Church Partners, you'll see our YouTube channel. And then our videos, these web training videos, the Waypoint 55 training videos, are organized in playlists around the topic. So whether it's your missions team leader, your prayer team leader, elders, and I think we've got 15 webinars that are under the elder category that I may refer to tonight, because some of the things that we're going to address, because we're going to talk about hopefully 9, 10, 11 things that we can get to tonight as time allows, we may refer back to some webinars that really spend a whole hour on that topic rather than just a few minutes that we're going to address tonight. So we want to invite you to go check out our YouTube channel. When you do, if you would hit the subscribe button and the like button, that'll help us when you subscribe. Then when you look at YouTube, the little notification will show up anytime a new video has been added to our channel. And so we'd also love for you to share our webinars with the other lay leaders in your church in the area of ministry where they serve. They may not be elders, but if we've got webinars for youth ministry, children's ministry, safety and security teams, and a number of other areas. And those people, we'd love to see them thrive in their area of ministry as well. And so if there's any way we can bring some kind of experts to the table and train them in that area that we do every month, we'd love for that to happen as well. So someone is appreciating my new glasses. I left my glasses. I had to go back to my own specs here tonight. So we do have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You'll notice there's Q&A, and that as we're talking, if you've got a question that you'd like to ask specifically to us as the panelists, that comes up in a different queue than the chat that's just going on among all the people that are joining us tonight. But if you'd like to have a question answered about a particular topic, type it in as soon as you think of it. We'll see it. I'll see it over on the side of my screen, and we'll try and answer it either live, or if we don't get to it, we'll answer it after the fact via email to make sure that we answer your question. But we're going to dive right in right now and talk about the 11 common elder errors. And to be honest, we got to be very careful. We were talking about this before our webinar started, because the four of us pretty much served as senior ministers only in one church. And so so four churches represented from the four of us. And so if any of those elders are watching tonight or later on demand on YouTube, we're going to try and change the names to protect the guilty as best we can. But you might figure out who we're talking about. But we do get to interact with lots of churches in the region very regularly. Every week, every month, we are getting to serve churches and particularly elders. And so a lot of the perspective that we'll see tonight is not only from the churches where we have officially served, but the churches that we have served as being staff members at Waypoint. And so we're gonna jump right in. Let's see, as usual, we want to always say thank you to MacU, who has been the sponsor of our webinar platform since we began 6 years ago. And they exist in the same way that we do to strengthen the church through equipping leaders. And so we're very thankful that they have sponsored our webinar channel. Talked about our playlists that are on our YouTube channel where you can direct people in your church. But today we're going to talk about 11 common elder errors. We made a list as a staff about a month ago about some of the errors we've seen personally. And to be honest, the list started getting really long. And I was like, well, we're never going to be able to do that. But as we looked at them, there were some common themes that they're kind of more categories that we were able to pare them down to 10 or 11 things that we hope to address tonight. If we don't get through all 11, then this will give us the opportunity to jump in and do another webinar that's the follow-on from this one. But the first one is the one that's really loaded, and that is that probably the error we see the most as we have seen elders in action is not understanding the elder's role. And there's a lot of ways we could head with this. It's interesting that our very first webinar that we did 6 years ago was the job description of an elder. And you could go to our YouTube channel and all of the webinars that we will refer to tonight, a link to those will be included in the show notes on our YouTube page. When you click on that, you'll see the notes below it, and you can find the links to that as well. But understanding the elder's role, and really what we see more often than not is it's not that they don't understand what their role is, it's that they get involved in things that aren't their role. Another way to say that is that they don't understand their lane, that they run in someone else's lane. And the elders have a very specific lane that the Bible describes of what oversight means. And the word elder, there's 3 words for elders in the Bible. And one of them, episkopos, is to oversee. Skopos is to see, epi is over, is you're giving oversight, and that's the lane that elders are supposed to do. And a lot of times we see that they get out of their lane, and really that robs the church because elders aren't doing their job, so they're out of their lane, but they're also robbing the people that are in the lane that they've run in. And we see that even in Scripture, that the first picture that we see of the church in action is in Acts chapter 6. We see some descriptions of the church in Acts 2 and Acts 4, kind of describes how the church was set up. But the first snapshot of the church that we have in action is Acts chapter 6, where we think of it as a deacon chapter. It's where the first deacons were installed to take care of the elderly widows, the Greek widows that weren't being taken care of as well as the Jewish widows. But really, I believe that the chapter is really not about deacons, even though that's the topic. What it's really about is showing the church leadership in action, where the elders delegated so that they could stay in their lane. They said, we're not going to do that. We are going to stay in our lane, and we're going to be committed to prayer, the ministry of the word. That's our lane. And we're going to find someone else to run in that other lane. And the interesting thing in that little short passage, verse 7, at the end of that, is the word so. And it's like, and what that word means in the Greek is so. If you understand the picture of what just happened, it says so because of their decision, the church grew. The number of disciples grew rapidly. And it's no coincidence that when the elders decided we're going to stay in our lane, we're going to get other people to stay in other lanes, that the church naturally grew rapidly. And so we love to invite you to look at some of the other webinars that we've done about elders staying in their lane and what that looks like, what the job description of an elder is. But I think most of the things that we see elders doing is getting in some other lane. And we're probably going to refer to some of those tonight. So that's number one. I got to take that one. But we're going to move on to number 2 here among our list. and that is not shepherding the flock well. One of the other Greek words for elder is poimen, and that is the word shepherd. And that's what elders are. That's their lane. And so, Neil, would you describe for us what we would mean when we say that elders make an error when they don't shepherd the flock well?
Sure, Tim, thanks. I believe Scripture points out to us that caring for your flock, your sheep, elder, and doing that well is your highest calling. Now, it's not the only thing an elder does, as we will talk, but man, it's got to be the highest calling, the highest priority for you. Peter writes in 1 Peter 5:2, and he says, as a fellow elder, I appeal to you, shepherd or care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Now, he goes on to talk about kind of qualifying what that means or what that looks like. But he says, elder, shepherd your flock and do it well. We don't have any greater example of that than Jesus. In John 10:11, he said, I'm the good shepherd. And this is a fascinating statement. Why was he a good shepherd? The next statement goes on to describe it. He said, I know my sheep and my sheep know me. Sheep get to know their shepherd by being with their shepherd, being around their shepherd. And so I just have to ask the question, elders, does your church know you as an elder, as a shepherd? Not just because maybe you've stood up on stage at some time and said, hey, I'm one of the elders here, but have they grasped that by the fact that you are with them? You are spending time with them. I preached a long time at Chester Christian, 35 years, and we used as our Bible for eldering a little book, They Smell Like Sheep. And a lot of times we would talk about man, you're stinking. You've been with the sheep a lot. And I think it's critical to do that. I was talking to Dave Heilman. I'll close out with this. I was talking to Dave Heilman, 4 or 5 years ago about the importance of shepherding. And he said, I think one of the greatest shifts we could make in most of our elder meetings is if we shifted to make shepherding the number one agenda item. In other words, he said, just to dedicate time, lots of time up front before anything else happens, to talk about shepherding needs in the flock. Who's hurting, who's having a problem, who's in a ditch somewhere along the way. And then spending time on our knees praying for that sheep, that family, right there in the elders meeting, not all together, but specifically for that person. And then after that's done, saying, okay, who's going to touch that family this week? Who's going to do that? And you don't move on until that assignment has been made. And then Dave, I love the way he ended this. He said, and then if there's time for anything else, move on to business. If there's time for anything else, I believe that if elders see shepherding as their key responsibility, man, they could spend all of their time talking about the shepherding needs of their flock.
All right, thanks, Neil. Diker, Paul, anything you want to chime in with before we move to the next thing?
I would just say, man, I think that's how you gain the trust of your people as well, is through shepherding. I was working with a church recently who's gone through some turmoil, and the elders were trying to get on stage and get stage time. And, and I'm like, listen, guys, the way you're going to gain the trust of your people is showing up at the hospital. That's where they're going to learn to know you and love you and trust you. It's not through the decisions you make in meetings or it's they got to know that you care, and it goes a long way shepherding.
I think the challenge there, we've got churches of all different sizes in our footprint in the Mid-Atlantic region, but as a church grows, often elders are less known the larger the church is. And I think the church has to be very strategic as the church grows for people to still know, for people to know who their elders are. They know who their staff are, but often they couldn't name the elders. In a church of 50 or 100, typically the church knows who the elders are. But if you're 300, 500, 700 plus, I think you got to be very intentional about making sure your people know. I'm frustrated when your leadership isn't on your website. Not that everybody's going to your website to see you, but that a lot of times I'd like to see who are the elders of the church that I can figure out who the elders are, who the shepherds are, because the shepherds know the sheep, but the sheep also know the shepherds, and that's pretty key, like Neil said. All right, we're going to move on. But that's number one there. These are not in any particular order. Actually, that's number two. But the next one is not holding effective elder meetings. And Dyke, I'm curious what you would say about this. Neil just said, if you did all your shepherding, if there's any time left, then you can figure out what to do. But I know that you've been helping some elders very recently in their meetings. So how would you try and qualify this as an error that elders often make?
So I'll give an intro to this. Productive, healthy, vibrant, thoughtful, open-minded, idea sharing, prayerful, spirit-filled, fruitful, mutually beneficial elder meetings are possible. That generally begins with a good amount of prayer, preparation, strong relationship building, just as Neil described. And I think that leading effective elder meetings are paramount to the health, clarity of vision, and future direction of the church. So I'll share a brief formula that we used, and a quick shout out to Ron Dove if he's watching, who served many years as chairman of the elders at the Church of Christ at Manor Woods while I was serving there as lead minister. And not that we perfected anything necessarily, but we did hone what we saw as a fairly effective and efficient governance model that began with the two of us and the chairman of the elder and deacon board meeting ahead of time to process agenda. There were times when we had someone on staff and an associate or XP role that were included in that. So lots of prayer, lots of preparation, lots of discussion, including a lot of information, as much as we were able to kind of absorb and go, okay, how do we want to process that? Most often as we were comparing those notes, we would be saying, well, what's the most pressing thing? What's most urgent? What are the shepherding priorities? What has anyone on staff or within the elders raised over the last month as a hot spot or shared as a request to be on the elder meeting agenda? What's coming down the road that we need to introduce now in order to give everybody, time to process a decision? Predominantly, we functioned under the staff-led, elder-protected model, which means the better informed everyone was, the better the elders were able to shepherd the flock and share vision and lead well and work in lockstep with all the elders and ministry staff together. So that prep call also helped us kind of clear the path. How much time are we going to give to each item if we have time? We'll get to this or that. It was the responsibility of the chairman to manage the meeting. So in that prep meeting, there were times when I'd say, I think there's probably kind of a big thing and it needs to be an agenda item. And the chairman might say, well, we don't need to bring that up in this meeting. I don't think that's even going to be an issue, but if it is, don't worry about it. I've got your back. And I go, okay, great. And other times I'd say, well, I don't really think this is an elder concern. And the chairman might say, well, you know what? We probably need to slow down and take some time on that. Everybody needs to give some input on that. And I'd say, okay. And it wasn't that we ignored anyone or swept anything under the rug. We just made priority decisions in setting the agenda. Practically speaking, that seemed to work pretty well. So some things that might get addressed, but maybe not as much time was spent on it as some individual wanted. And in a meeting, we always say anybody can raise any issue that they like, but that's where a good elder chair can really help manage the direction of a meeting. They can say, thank you for introducing that, maybe not for today or maybe for next meeting, or they could table an issue for the next meeting, or they could say, you know what, yeah, that's urgent and critical, or that affects something else that we're going to talk about, and let's spend some time on that. Or they could say, you know what, that's a big enough issue. Can we meet at a separate time and kind of address that in a different setting? Or they could just say, hey, you and you meet with that person and that person, take care of it or give us an update at the next meeting. And that kind of gets back to that Act 6 delegation again.
All right. That's a great, and the Bible does not talk about the chairman of the elders. There's a lot of churches I was a part of growing up. My dad was Air Force, so I saw a different church every 2-3 years. But sometimes I thought the chairman of the elders was proud of his role and almost to a fault. But a good chairman of the elders is the one that runs the meetings well. That's his primary role, is to make sure that in partnership with the senior minister, the meetings run well, and that he keeps everybody engaged and moving along, tabling things that need to be tabled. So that's a really good description, Dyke. Frank asked, how do you avoid the deep dive into the business of the church? And I think what Dyke just described is having a not only an agenda, a list of what you'd like to talk about, but in that pre-meeting phone call, deciding how much time you're going to assign to each of those topics will hold you from going into a 45-minute conversation about something that really should be a 3-minute conversation, if at all. And so that pre-meeting call is huge, so that you hold your meetings to an acceptable amount of time. We've all been in elders meetings that have been too long. And a lot of it is because there wasn't a decision on the front end about what's going to be the bulk of our time spent on in that evening. If it's evening, I've seen some elders that are really healthy when they have morning meetings before work, because then you have to stop because guys have to get to work. And I think that's brilliant. One of the things I've noticed is that the larger the church gets, typically the shorter the elders meetings get. And I think there's a lesson there, that which comes first, the chicken or the egg. I've got a friend of mine that's a fairly large church, not in our region, but their elders meetings are 30 minutes. And it's like, how people say, how you do that? Well, number one, there's information being shared between the meetings, but they know that we're gonna talk about what we need to talk about. Have lunch. It's lunch. So eat for 30 minutes, talk for 30 minutes, and they're out. And you can lead a church doing it that way if you're intentional about what you're doing. All right, moving on. There are a couple of resources before we move on. Number one, there's a webinar on the YouTube channel about the 7 key elements of an effective elders meeting. And so I'd love for you to check that out if you'd like. And the other thing that Waypoint offers to elders is what we call the OSR report, which is we'll attend your elders meetings virtually via Zoom 2 or 3 times, and then just give you a report, 3 or 4 pages of here's what we see, here's what we observe, here's what we recommend, and here's what we strongly suggest. Or here we suggest and strongly recommend, OSR. And it's not surprising that usually what we see is common among, it's not like one report's way different from another. About 80% of every report is the same as the last one, that elders fall into the same bad habits, that they just need to be the light shown on that, and so they can be a lot more efficient and effective in their elders meetings. All right, we're going to move on to the next one, although all these would make great webinars. So the next one we've got here, number 4, is not having a pipeline. And by that, we're talking about thinking about who your next elders are going to be. And Paul, I wonder if you could chime in and let us know kind of what you've seen, good or bad, as far as elders not thinking intentionally about who the next set of elders are going to be.
Yeah, and I think the first step in that is agreeing that you need a pipeline, or agreeing that there needs to be a rotation of elders in your elder team. I see one of the mistakes I think a lot of churches make is that, an elder becomes an elder for life, in that he never rotates off. There's never a season where he steps away from the meeting, steps away from active duty, so he can experience church from the other side. And then also gives opportunity for new elders to rotate in, to bring new ideas, fresh ideas. I think it's important, not just to replace those who are passing on to glory, but it's important to keep your elder team from becoming stagnant as well. When I think about pipeline, I really think about discipleship. I think, one of the main characteristics of potential elders and elders should be that they are disciple makers. I know the church that I served in Abingdon, that was the one thing we looked for. We wouldn't consider someone to serve as an elder in our church unless they were actively discipling other people in some way. some form and fashion. And so for me, the elder pipeline is a very relational thing. And so it would be a part of our regular conversation, monthly meetings. It would be part of a regular conversation as we would think about, do we see any potential leaders, potential elders in our church? We would encourage elders as they were leading small groups to identify not just someone to take over their small group to mentor, but also to identify within their small groups or ministry teams that they observed that they were constantly looking for those next elders. And then we would encourage them personally then to come alongside those individuals and just develop a relationship with them, disciple them. We never had really a specific curriculum that we would use. I know there are churches that have classes that they offered. I think those are good. Some of the greatest resource on that is E2 Effective Elders, and they have those 4 books. I never can remember, so I pulled it up on my phone. But Answer His Call, Reflect His Character, Lead His Church, and Enjoy His People. I think those are 4 great resources. And so at some point after you've had the conversation with those potential elders about casting vision over them, to say, man, I think God's leading you in this direction. I can see you serving well in this role. I think God's giving you the giftedness, is to, hand those books to them, maybe one at a time, have them read one a month, and then meet back with them to talk about what that looks like. And so just try to develop them in that way. And then E2 also has another resource I would suggest. It's called Operation Pipeline. I won't give you those 4 steps because I want you to have to buy their book. But yeah, there are a lot of great resources out there. But at the end of the day, it's just about it's just about discipling people. It's identifying young men in your church and then raising them up, and it just requires time, whether it's on the golf course or on the lake fishing or early morning coffees or whatever it is, so that they can see your heart, and then inviting them to go with you on a hospital call, or inviting them to participate in leadership in some way. I think that's the best way that I've seen to recruit new elders.
I've asked this question many times to preachers when I'm sitting in their office. Well, I've talked to many preachers and say, I'm losing an elder. He's moving to, because of his job. And I say, well, who's next up? And if you want to figure out how to have a silent moment in an office, just ask a preacher, who's your next elder? And because almost every time they have no clue. And it's because they haven't been intentional about looking for and preparing their next elder. And I'm reminded, years ago, I took Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University, and he talks about, everybody's always surprised. It's about having your emergency fund. And he said, everybody's always surprised when their car breaks down. And because you're not planning on your car breaking down, but you should never be surprised that a car will break down, because that's what they do eventually. And the same is true with losing an elder. Someday you're going to lose an elder, whether they pass on and go to glory, or they move, or they get honked off at you and leave your church, or something. You're going to lose an elder. And so if you don't have a plan to replace them, then it's really you're at fault for not being intentional about finding who your next set of elders are. So
our elders served 3-year terms. And it was a mandatory one-off. So we kept a list of, here are guys that we think are ready to serve as elders now. Here are guys that could be ready 1 to 3 years. And that was and once a year, as we were looking for, usually we would have 2 elders who would rotate off every year. We were looking to fill those 2 spots, but it was also just a report back on who's discipling, who's mentoring on the guys on that list. So,
there's a webinar we did years ago. It must be in the playlist, about developing and recruiting leaders in your church, specifically elders. And one of our church planters used the metaphor of baseball, levels of baseball: AAA, AA, single A. And major leagues is when you're in the elders. But AAA guys, they're the ones they can get called up any day. They're ready to roll. And AA are the guys with talent, but they need a little bit more seasoning. And so you can check out that webinar to see how could we be strategic about intentionally deciding who in our church is in which tier, and then how do we move them from whatever tier they're at to one step closer to being an elder. That'd be great. All right, let's move on. And that's great. That's a whole webinar in and of itself, but that's a great topic. And so don't forget to hit the Q&A button if you've got a question about one of these topics. Um, so number 5 is related to after they become an elder, how do we develop an elder so they become better elders? It's not like you're as good as you're ever going to be in as elder the first day you arrive. And so how are elderships, the mistake they made is they never help guys figure out how to be a better elder over time. And I would hope that after a guy's been an elder 10 years or 20 years, that he could look back and say, man, I'm so much better now than I used to be. And here's why. And so, but very rarely do churches have things that they're doing intentionally about developing their elders. And so, Neil, I asked you to kind of chime in on this one. What would you say are some practical ways and reasons why we need to continue to make sure our elders being equipped to become better at what they do?
Sure, I'll go to the second thing first. Why? I just don't think we can assume that an elder knows and understands what an elder is. And I also think we're forgetful. Over time, we got to be reminded over and over and over again. I volunteered as a police chaplain for 25 years, and safety officers are so strong, just like school teachers, and constantly doing training. It's not like a cop forgets how to shoot his gun, but they take training on a regular basis on how to shoot it, how to arrest someone and on. I think that it's important for us to do the same thing with our elders, not teach them how to shoot guns or arrest people. But I do think a couple of things that I think are just must. Number one, I think it's just a must that you carve out study and development time for your elder team. And again, don't assume that an elder will remember what an elder is ever. I believe that it is the lead minister's responsibility to repeatedly cast the vision of what an elder is in our context. Where we are, this is what an elder is. And because you're going to probably have guys that have come from other churches and, okay, this is what an elder is there and that different sizes and that sort of thing. I think it's important. And I believe it falls on the lead minister's shoulders to develop that. Sometimes we are meeting with ministers and they will be talking about their elders. Well, my elders are, and what I will share with them was that once you've been in a church more than about 6 years, you don't have a problem you didn't create. And so I think it's true in an eldership. Once you've been with a group of elders for 5 or 6 years, you don't have any issue that you didn't help create. I'm talking to the lead minister there. So I just believe that repeatedly casting the vision of this is what an elder looks like at our place. Of course, Paul already mentioned the E2 guys and stuff, resources, incredible stuff. And I would reach out and look on their website and get that. But I think a second thing that's equally important in developing your elder team is just spending relational time as an elder team, spending time together. We picked up something. We used to go to Next Level Conference as an elder team down in Savannah, and we picked up the best thing that we picked up there is elders meetings ought to have a beginning time and an end time. A bigger church gets, and they had more people almost on their stage than we had in our whole church. Sometimes it would seem, but what they said was we start at 6 o'clock and end at 7:30, or maybe it was 6:30 and end at 8 o'clock, and then we go to Cracker Barrel. Our guys jumped on that. And that was one of the best changes that we made, and that getting the ball rolling and talking about what's really important up front, rather than somebody dropping the hammer, the very last second, you go on forever. No, we're done at 8 o'clock and we're going to Cracker Barrel. And the fascinating thing was you could not talk business at Cracker Barrel. You couldn't. It was you would be you'd get the bill for everybody else's meal if you just try to go there. I think that was great. I think it's important really to do stuff with elder families together on a regular basis, quarterly or whatever, getting families together, husbands and wives, and even kids, doing, fun outings, whatever that looks like. And everybody's different, but figuring out what is great for your team and doing something as a team. Retreats are a great time just to get to know each other. And so I think you got to do both those things. Develop your elder team, carve out time to study and develop together, but relationally building your elder team from core up. It really is about discipleship, as Paul said.
The one thing for me, 30 years of ministry, if I could do it over again, I would have built in those regular eating in people's homes, inviting all the elders, their wives, kids to my house, cookouts, some way to develop those real friendships. Because even within the eldership, that at times there would be tension between elders that would have been taken care of had they been spending time outside of those meetings with one another to really know each other well, and so a lot of conflict ahead of time, conversations would have been taken care of in those. I wish I would have. That's a mistake I made. Is I wish I would have spent a lot more time just relationally with elders.
Paul Tim puts it this way. He mentioned this in our notes. He said, "I wish I would have treated my elders as my most important small group."
Yeah,
I could not agree with that more.
yeah.
We're gonna move on, but Neil mentioned a couple of things that I think are great for developing your elders, practical. One is going to conferences together, and it doesn't have to be an elder conference, although some conferences there are breakout sessions or topics that are specifically for elders. But just getting out of town, it's the van ride there, the van ride back, the meal at the on the way to the hotel, debriefing about the sessions that you went to. That's a really powerful moment for gelling your elders together, particularly if they go with your staff as well. And so that's huge. And then Neil also talked about a retreat, an elders retreat that I believe needs to be in your annual calendar rhythm for your leaders. And you've got to block it out. No one misses. It's the first Sunday of October or first weekend of October every year. So block it out. And you can do training development as part of the agenda for a retreat, Friday night, all day Saturday, or whatever it is. I love when elder retreats bleed over into Sunday and you have to tell your people, hey, all of our elders are off on a retreat, planning, working together for next year. I think your church loves to hear that kind of stuff, that the elders are working on themselves. And so if you can be gone on Sunday morning, that's even better. We do have a webinar on what effective elder retreats can look like that I'd invite you to check out. But whatever it is, don't assume that everybody knows what an elder is when they join, and that they can't be a better elder by working on it together. And so that's an elder error, is that you don't work on getting better as elders over time. All right, we're going to move on. Don't forget to hit the Q&A button if you've got a question about any one of these topics that we can get back together. Number 6, we do have to move on. Some of these are quicker than others, is not providing intentional care for the minister and his family. And who did we say? Dyke, if you would chime in on this one, kind of give us your perspective on this as far as what this would look like. And elder errors, I mean, famously, there's always a tension between the elders and the minister in a lot of churches. And so how do you flip the script on that to where elders are actually caring for the lead minister rather than having an adversarial relationship?
I'll actually give a very brief anecdote for this. And this is a place where Waypoint 55 webinars address as well, leader care issues. So, but I can't write a question in the Q&A. So I have a quick question for this panel. What you believe are the ideal rhythms of elder meetings? Is it a half an hour once a week? Is it an early morning, an hour a week? Is it once a month? Is it more or less often. And I love the idea of, hey, here's our time frame, and then we're going to go do something socially together. But have you guys seen in your experience, or what do you recommend? Because I've wrestled through that. I don't know that I have an ideal.
Doesn't the Bible say monthly? We do Bible things Bible ways, so I don't know. So that's a good question. Yeah,
I
you
think
can
it's
try.
Paul's letter to Timothy.
I,
Thou
I
shalt.
think, Dyke, the worst time, Sunday afternoon.
Ooh,
How horrible.
yeah, yeah. Nobody's.
Okay. Eh,
I'm the football game has started, or I'm losing my nap time, or
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, we met monthly. I'm just wondering if a briefer weekly meeting, I'm just wondering that out loud and, processing it years later. So just thinking out loud. All right.
Worked with,
So go ahead.
I worked with a group of elders that they met on Zoom. Really, it was a phone call while all the guys were driving to work. There, it was in DC area, and it was like Tuesday morning, 6:30 to 7, and they're all in their cars on their phone. And I thought that was fast weekly. So yeah, there's no biblical depiction of how to get it done, so long as you're caring for your flock, overseeing them. So
Yeah. Good.
that's a good question.
Good use
All
of
right.
time. So, not providing intentional care for the lead minister and his family. It's been attributed to Peter Drucker, the great management expert, for saying the four hardest jobs in America are president of the United States, president of the university, CEO of a hospital, and pastor of a church. So I just heard a fascinating podcast on this, and I'm still processing this, so I'll just kind of throw this out there. Carrie Newhoff was interviewing Jim Bergen out at Flatirons in Colorado. 2 hour long, very raw conversation, talking about him being put on forced sabbatical by his elders when he thought, for the most part, things were going well and they were growing up to the right. And he described how hard that was, painful, and ultimately how helpful it turned out to be for him. But in the middle of it, Bergen made this stunning comment. And I've not, maybe you guys have heard this. I've never heard anybody make this kind of a comment before. So I don't even know if this is right, but because he was describing his discovery coming out of a toxic leadership culture that he was a part of in a growing church setting where they had tons of baptisms, they're reaching tons of people for Christ. But he came to the conclusion that caring for the ministry staff is at least as important, if not more important, than baptisms, which I found that like I'm still wrapping my brain around that comment. Providing care for the minister and his family, for the ministry staff, is as important, if not more important, than decisions for Christ. So I'm wondering, like, is he right? Because if that's true, I mean, the implications of that are enormous, and he might be right. Does the elder team around a lead minister truly understand, have a full appreciation for the demands and the pressures on the lead minister, the daily sacrifices to lead the lead minister to his family, to his health, his physical and mental health? There's so much to unpack there. And again, that's a place where probably really good to look for some additional resources, Waypoint webinars for that, but worth processing.
Yeah. Isn't that fascinating? I would just ask the question on the front end is, who's pastoring your pastor?
Mm.
Everybody assumes everybody else is getting pastored, but who's pastoring your pastor? And does he have to go outside of his own church to get it, is the question. Most do. And that's a shame. That the people who should know him best and care for him most should be inside of his church. And so for elders listening tonight or on YouTube later, it's just answer the question, who's pastoring your pastor? And part of that is his family, and particularly his wife. Carl Kuhl's one of our former church planters, now back at his home church at Southeast in Louisville. But in one of his books, talk about how he works doubly hard to make sure his church takes care of his wife. And we all know if mom ain't happy, ain't nobody happy, right? And so, but does the preacher's wife love to go to your church? Uh, and that's a relational thing. And so being intentional about making sure that your pastor is pastored, um, is all like you're right. It's a whole conversation. We've had some individual webinars and then parts of other webinars where we talk about developing a culture of leader care, pastor care in your church. And so that's that's an error that we see elders making, is not being intentional about that. All right, we're going to keep moving on. We're getting through our list here, not very quickly. We got to move right along. Not
Doing good.
following bylaws. This was mine. This was quick. Somebody find your bylaws and read them. All right, and then follow them. We'll move on, but especially when you're going to hire, buy land, or build a building, legally you have to follow your bylaws. And the Bible says that we obey the laws of the land, right? That's we do Bible things Bible ways. The Apostle Paul said, "Obey the laws of the land." If your state says you have to have bylaws, and then you have to enforce your own bylaws, that's what we have to do. And so recently, I've been consulting with a church that hired their senior minister, did not follow the prescription of the bylaws on how they would hire their minister. And it got them into some trouble because anyway, and the first thing on our checklist when we help a church hire, the first item is go find your bylaws and read them. And they did, and they still didn't follow up. So anyway, that's that one. We'll move on. Number 8, elder errors, not considering the impact of having relatives on the elder team or the staff team. And so I've got Dyke, I don't know if you could chime in on this, if this has happened to you, or other. Well, we've seen this in some churches where it becomes a problem. What does this look like?
That's tough to do quickly, and just real quick. And I think this is okay for me to share. So I started Church of Christ of Manor Woods for 18 and a half years, and our bylaws conversation got kicked down the road every year that I was there. And that was one of the things when I had before joining the Waypoint staff, that was one of the things that Ron Duff said, "Hey, just share anything you want to share, on your way out, kind of the final elder meeting." And I was like, "Hey, that's something, especially for the next person coming on, have that." We were working off of a 1971 set of bylaws, which meant that we cheated a lot. Like, well, that's what that said, but it doesn't really apply. So here's how we're doing it. So anyway, that was one of my strong encouragements. Like that would be really. They actually took several years to work through a lengthy process. Even had some legal consultation to look at it, make sure this is sound and solid. And so once that was finished, I was like, "Ooh, is that okay to share?" And in limited fashion, I can. So if that's something that would maybe serve somebody on this webinar, well, let us know. The answer is yes, you can hire relatives on the team with great caution. And I think the key is that everybody understands that. And we had a couple of situations where we just had a lot of conversations leading up to it. Like we hired an elder's wife on staff to be office manager. It was a great hire. Then we hired a children director's ministry who was that elder and his wife, their daughter, and it was a great hire. And we just had those conversations ahead of time, like, all right, we all understand you can't be a voting block, right? No, we're not going to be a voting block. And so those kinds of things we just addressed ahead of time. We created a staffing structure where we hired some part-time people, made our youth minister, the next gen, kind of give him a promotion, put him over that team. And then we wanted to hire his wife. And so in an abundance of caution, instead of putting her under him, we contracted with her for outreach events and all the family events, and put her as a direct report under our office manager. So that's one way that we finagled that. So yes, it can be done with an abundance of caution. It can be done well, but not done well. We can probably all attest to that. There's some really bad things that happen, including if you have to let somebody go or put somebody under some sort of a personal improvement plan. That just gets really icky. So there are some tough situations if it doesn't go well.
We also never had a father and son on the elder team. We did have some situations where dads would step down so that their son could
That's good.
begin to serve.
That's real good.
I saw this where it became a problem where it was a little country church, and part of it is who are going to get to do it otherwise, but that's a whole other solution of pipeline and discipleship and all that. But a new little church where they had two elders who were brothers, and one of their wives was the church secretary. And so, I mean, that became problematic really quick, and the church just choked because of everybody being related in leadership. And so they had to, rather than just letting it go, they needed to get really assertive about how we're going to get more people involved in leadership than just two brothers and one of their wives. All right, we'll move on. That's what we're not going to do this, Paul. I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you. This is a whole nother webinar. Paul will maybe bring you back for this, but we talked about this on the front end of everybody knowing our lane, and elders are providing leadership about where we're headed and getting united about that. And we've talked about some steps that you can get united on that, but that's number 9. Number 10, I'll mention quickly. We always try and finish it on time, so we're going to jump through these and stay tuned for other elder webinars that we'll do. This panel's been great, so we'll maybe bring this back.
Only thing I would say about 9 is be proactive, not reactive. Move from the reactive conversations where you're just reacting to problems to proactive. How are we moving forward?
Yeah, that's great. Putting out fires. If you put out fires,
yeah,
you put out fires by delegating. That's the fire in Acts 6 was the Grecian widows, and they said we're staying in our lane. We're moving forward as a church. This one I think is mostly addressed that we've referred to by having a rotation. Where elders can take a time off because there's expectation on the elder, his wife, his family, being there quite a bit, and appreciating that it's nice to have a break. So we'll move on. One thing, we don't have a slide for this, but we'll move on and we're going to finish. But I guess it's probably in development that Neil was talking about, but I think elders should commit to developing theologically. Because your church assumes that you as an elder kind of know your Bible, and at least better than they do, and don't prove them wrong. And so part of your development as elders is having conversations about where do we land on this topic, and there's plenty of topics out there that you should be talking through, and trading resources and reading things in advance of a meeting. But that would be the 11th common elder is not developing theologically as a team, because your sheep assume that you know your Bible. And so let's not prove them wrong. All right. Well, we want to thank you for your time tonight. I've addressed several of these webinars that we've had in the past. One we did about deacons versus elders. That's knowing your lane. We want to tell you about the next couple of webinars that we got coming up, and then our next event in person. But coming up in November, these are out of order. Neil's got our next one for preachers about developing a prayer shield, a personal intercession team for your pastor and ministry staff. So that's coming up next month. So invite your preacher to join that webinar. And then the following month, we do 2 a year for mission team leaders. And this is for how your church can serve your missionaries by debriefing them when they come back to the States, short-term or long-term. The big event that we've got coming up is our Disciple Making Summit that's coming up on November 19th. And that is going to be in 4 locations all in one night in Johnson City, Tennessee, Richmond, Raleigh, and in Conway, Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And Jim Putman is going to be doing 2 sessions of training, and then one local leader from each of those events is going to be leading that. Our staff, the 4 of us, are going to be represented among those 4 locations. We won't tell you which one because you'll all go to Dykes if we tell you which one you're doing. But we want to invite you to bring your elders and other disciple-making people to this event to be equipped on how you can be making disciples in your church. as one of the primary roles of elders. So we hope you'll come to that. Check out our website, Waypoint Church Partners, go to the events tab, and you can sign up. There's lunch or dinner provided, a dessert, great training, good conversation around roundtables. You'll be glad you came. So thanks for joining us tonight. We're really glad you came. Please check out our other webinars, and we hope to see you at a webinar soon. Thanks to our panel. This is the first time we've done a staff panel. And so I'm going to invite them back if they're willing to join me on another webinar coming up soon. But we hope to see you again. And thanks for taking the time to join our webinar tonight. Have a good night.
Thanks, everybody.